Hello everyone and welcome to another Daily Dose of Gatsby. Today we're on episode number 10. As always, I am Shane Thomas. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at smthomas3. Also make sure to check out the Code Karate website, sign up for the newsletter, and subscribe on YouTube. Today we're going to be talking about how to create pagers or pages of content using Gatsby Awesome-Pagination. Basically, this is for if you have a listing of blog posts or any other kind of list that you want to add a pager to it. So you want to be able to go to the next page. So rather than have a list of 1,000, you maybe have lists of 100 or 10 at a time, and you can just page through it. So this is going to make it very easy for you to set these pages up. And once you see how it can be used on our example today, you're going to be able to use it for any list that you want to create a pager for. Let's get started. So we're going to start on the gatsby.js.org page for Gatsby Awesome-Pagination. So you can see there is some instructions here. I didn't follow these exactly, but it's pretty close. It gives you a good idea of pretty much how it should work. So you can definitely check that out. We're going to go ahead and take a look at our site, starting on the command line, and you're going to have to add this plugin. Depending on if you're using yarn or npm, it's either going to be npm install -- save Gatsby Awesome-Pagination or yarn add Gatsby Awesome-Pagination, just like that. So we'll let that run, and that's going to go ahead and add that to our site. And once we'll go ahead and leave this running, we're going to open up a code editor here, and we're going to need to go to gatsby-node.js. And remember, this is where it actually goes out during the build process and pulls in any of that content that you're going to need for your site. One thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to add this paginate function here. Paginate like that, I believe, and it's require. And then we actually need Gatsby Awesome-Pagination. Just like that. So then this is going to allow us to use this function to actually create a pagination. And if we go back to the documentation, you can see we're basically doing this. We're just requiring it rather than importing it. And then you can use the paginate function similar to this. So you can see here that the plugin was added, so we're good to go. If we go back to our page, we're now going to add this paginate function. We just need it to be somewhere after our GraphQL query that creates our listing. So in this case, we have a GraphQL query that's running. It's just pulling articles from a Drupal site. If you watch past episodes, you'll be able to follow along directly with this. If not, just know that you have to have a GraphQL query that gives you a list of items, right? So this could be anything, whether you're querying Markdown files or a WordPress site, a Drupal site, or any other type of hosted CMS. You're just going to need your GraphQL query there that gives you that list. And we're just going to go ahead and we're going to call paginate. And we need to pass in create page here. So you can see we get it there, but we're going to pass it in. Now we need to pass in our list of items. And we need to actually get down to our list. So in this case, it's going to be articles.data.allNodeArticle.nodes. So it's going to articles.data, go to allNodeArticle, get all the nodes. Yours could vary a little bit depending on what your GraphQL query looks like. Just make sure you need to get the actual listing. So it's getting a list of items. We need to tell it how many items per page. And typically I wouldn't do a number this low, but I don't have that many articles, so I want to show you how it works. I would typically do 10 or 20 or whatever you think makes sense for your use case. But that's how many items are going to show up on a single page. We need to give it a path prefix, and this is what path you want it to live at. I'm just going to put it at /blog. You could put this at whatever path you wanted that page to live at. And now we need to tell it what component to use. So this is similar to, if you look down below, when I create the page, I'm telling it what component to use. So I'm doing essentially the same thing, but I'm going to tell it to use templates / we'll call it blog.js. And I haven't created this yet, so this doesn't exist. We'll create this next. And go ahead and do that. So that's all I need to do in Gatsby node.js. I need to make sure I'm bringing in this paginate function. I need to go ahead and call this paginate function, making sure I'm passing in the list of items. Now let's go ahead and create this template. So I'm going to go into my source templates folder. I'm going to create a blog.js file. And here's where our template's going to actually live. So we're just going to start off like we normally would. Import React from React. Import prop types from prop types. And then import GraphQL from Gatsby. Now, I also have some other components that, based on my site, I'm going to pull in. This would vary depending on how you've laid out your site. So I'm going to import our layout component from components layout. Import SEO from components SEO. Import article preview. So I have an article preview, which is basically just like a teaser for my articles. And then we're actually going to create a new component here in just a little bit for our pager. Because rather than create it on this specific template, I want to create a reusable component that I can use anytime I need a pager on my site. So in this case, we're only going to have one, but if you could imagine a case where you might have multiple pagers depending on different listings, if you're looking at blog posts or different types of content that you might want to display, being able to use it multiple times is convenient. So it's just a good practice to get into the habit of breaking things up into smaller components that can then be pieced together on your page. So we're going to import pager from components, and then we'll call it pager. And we haven't created that yet, but we will here shortly. So we'll just call this blog, and we need to pull in our data. We're going to create a query that's going to populate that, and we also need to pull in our page context. And this is something that is going to contain information about our pager component that we're going to create. So all we're going to need to do here is we need to, well, let's actually go down and let's create this query first. So I'm going to start by just setting up my prop types. Again, you could get more specific with this, or you don't technically even need it, but I like to put it in there. Just basically saying it's an object that's required. Page context is also an object that is required as well. And now let's create our GraphQL query. And so this page query is going to pull in all of our data for our articles. So this way we can get the specific data. So if you look here, all I'm getting is the ID, the title, the path alias. So that really isn't going to get all of the information I actually need. But in the query here, I can actually get more of that information. I probably should add a sort on here to exactly match the sort that I'm going to put here. In this case, it just works out that way. But just keep in mind, you're going to want to make sure that your articles or whatever content you're pulling here matches the same as the query you're writing here. So you're going to want to make sure it's sorted the same way. In this case, it works out, but just keep a note on that if it doesn't seem like it's working the way you'd expect it to. So I'm just going to copy in this query because it's a little bit long, but we'll go through it once I get it copied in. Okay, so let's walk through and see what this is actually doing. So this is going to pass in these variables here, this skip and this limit value, and this is information that's passed in from that paginate function. This is important because this skip and limit is how it tells the page to be created. So this blog template is going to get run once for each page that the paginate function is creating, and each time it's going to pass in where to start in the list and essentially how many to show. And that's going to allow this GraphQL query to pull in the right items each time it's building the page. So this GraphQL query is going to get run multiple times, once for each page. So you need to make sure, here's where I say I'm sorting. I'd probably want to add that back to this if it didn't match for some reason, but in this case it sorts this by default, so it's fine. We want to make sure we say the skip, that's how many items are going to be skipped and how many items to show. So you want to pass that in to your GraphQL query. Again, note that yours might look a little bit different depending on what you're actually querying. In this case, I'm querying a Drupal site. So I'm pulling in a bunch of information. Go back and watch past episodes if you want to see how we got to this query. But essentially, it's just what information do you need to populate your templates or your page. So I'm pulling in this info. This is going to get passed into this data attribute here. Now let's go ahead and actually create this component. We're going to start with layout. Give it just some SEO meta tag information here. Create an H1. Now I'm actually going to want to return this. So since I'm creating the component this way, we need to make sure we're returning our JSX. And up here, I'm going to actually just grab an article constant here, just so I don't have to reach into this data variable as much or as deep each time. So node articles dot nodes. Something like that should work. So I'm just simplifying this a little bit. Now I creating my JSX that's just going to return a layout. And what's going to be in that layout? Well, we want to actually map through all of the articles list that I'm getting. So in this case, I think I was only pulling in 3, but however many articles will be the number that you set right here in items per page. So if you had 100 and you had 1,000 articles, this would get run 10 times, and each time this articles constant would end up with 100 items. In this case, it will be 3. But we want to do articles.map. We'll put it in an article variable and something like that just to create it. And then in here, we actually want to put whatever information we want to display for each item. In this case, I'm loading in this article preview component, so I'm going to use that. I think that is all we need. So let's review this quick. So I'm just creating this article preview component. Yours could be different. You might have you might put JSX right in here, or actual HTML markup, and just print the title. If you want to just do the title and the path, something like that. It just really depends on your setup. But this is essentially just a teaser component. If you look at it, it's going to create a link around the title field, put the image, and then print the summary. So we're just reusing that component each time to make it a little bit more reusable, a little bit more friendly to pull it across in multiple places, because I do have other places that this preview is getting used. And that's all there is to it as far as that is concerned. But now we also need to talk about this pager component that we didn't actually use yet, or we haven't implemented. So this is what is actually going to display the pager at the bottom of the page. You could put it at the top if you wanted, you could put it wherever you want. But essentially these are the links to go to the next page or the previous page for your actual pager to work. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to create or call this pager component. I haven't created it yet, but I know what it's going to be. And it's going to require page context. The page context is what contains the information to tell the pager or pager links what page to go to. So you need to make sure you pass in this page context. So I'll save this, but again, it won't work quite yet. So I'm going to go to my source components folder and create a pager.js file. And inside this pager.js file is what we're actually going to create this pager component. So we need to use link, the link component from Gatsby, and this is going to allow us to create links to the next and previous pages. I'm gonna go ahead and import prop types from prop types. Again, that's not necessarily required, but I would recommend it. I don't know why we put that one first. There we go. I like to start with React and then work down to the Gatsby stuff. But it doesn't really matter. It's more just a preference. So we're going to get that page context prop that I had mentioned before. We want to make sure we have that. Now, what are we actually going to do in this? Well, we actually want to spit out the markup for this pager. So I'm going to destructure just some variables here. So I want previous page path and next page path. And I can get this from this page context. And this is going to allow it, these path variables are essentially going to be what this previous pager would be or what the next pager would be. So when you're creating these links, you can use these to know, okay, this is the URL or the link I'd click on to get to the next page in this pager that I'm creating. So we're going to return this, and I'm just going to create a div. I'm not going to spend a lot of time styling this, but just keep in mind that you could style this however you want, right? So I'm going to start by checking if previous page path exists, and if it does, then I'm going to spit out some actual markup. So if this section right here, this part of the conditional won't run if previous page path isn't set. That way, if there isn't a previous, if I'm on the first page, I don't necessarily want to show the previous link, right? You only want to show it if there's a previous page to go to. So in this case, this is just a simple way to check that. I'll just create a span. Again, I'm not spending too much time on the actual styling of it. Now I'm going to use that link component, and what am I going to link to? Well, I'm going to link to the previous page path. And in the actual text, I'll just put previous and close out that link component, close out the span. And I'm going to do the same thing for next page path. So now we have our markup. I am going to go down here and going to set my prop types. Again, I'm just going to do page context. Just make sure it is required. And then export, always make sure you export your actual component. If you don't export it, it's not going to work. Just like that. So create the pager, set the prop types, export the component. Inside here, I'm creating a link for the previous path only if it exists, creating a link for the next path only if it exists. So let's save this, and if it works, great. If it blows up, we'll go ahead and have to debug it a little bit. Run yarn develop, or if you're using just npm, you can just use Gatsby develop. This is going to go ahead and run this. It does tell me my plugins have changed. Now, you probably don't want to write all this code without article preview. So see, I have a problem. Article preview is defined but never used. Well, it's because I didn't spell it correctly. So let's go into here, article preview. So that's going to not work. Oh, okay. Well, that's because it was added a second time there automatically. So it's automatically imported. So let's fix it. So make sure I got the spelling right. Funny how one little character can cause such an issue, right? So here we go. We're going to do it again. Hopefully I spelled everything right this time. Syntactically, we are good to go, it looks like. There we go. So a little debugging never hurt. I'm going to open up this page and we will take a look. So remember I said the path prefix was going to be blog and it didn't work. Okay, well let's take a look here. Blog.js, oh, okay. As I sometimes, if you watched past videos, forget to do. Forgot to export at the bottom. That should fix it. Cannot read property nodes if undefined. Alright, so let's see here. Data.allNode article. Let's try again. Child image sharp. So this is just a case of me trying to type faster than I'm actually capable of typing, clearly. But as you'll notice when you go through this, you'll easily run into these types of problems as well, where, you know, anytime you've actually wrote any code, you run into small little issues of syntax where you didn't quite type it right. There we go. So again, just a bunch of little minor mistakes you probably caught as I was typing it out and said that doesn't look quite right, but I was a little hasty in my typing this out to try to get it done quickly. So I just had to fix some of those little syntax issues. Now it works, and the errors are pretty self-explanatory, so read through them and just they're pretty helpful in figuring out what you did wrong. At least I've got pretty good at reading them because I make a lot of mistakes. So now let's take a look. We got 3 articles, and you can see there's a next link here. I don't see a previous link. You notice how it changes the URL here, so that's exactly what we would expect. And now I have a previous and a next link. Again, didn't worry too much about the styling, but you can style that however you want. Go to the 3rd page, and I only have 8 articles, so there is no next link, but I can go back. That's really all there is to it in order to get pagination or pagers set up on your Gatsby site using Gatsby Awesome-Pagination. You can see we ran into some syntax issues along the way. You probably will as well, or maybe you won't, and then I'll congratulate you for that. But either way, just work through the errors, read the error messages, figure things out, and you're able to actually go ahead and get pagers set up pretty easily. As you can see, it didn't take too long, and now we can reuse pagers, and now that you understand how it works, it's very easy to set up pagers for any lists of content that you might need on your Gatsby site. So that's it for this time. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.